My ambition, und.
Hi everybody.
Welcome back.
I'm not even joining in with that today.
What? Oh, guys, don't leave me behind.
Hi everybody. Welcome to
Yay.
Mambition.
Yay. I love the fact that Alison joined in as well. She said she's happy to be here. Love it. Yes. Welcome back. So today, guys, as you might have heard and seen, we have Alison Campbell. Alison is the founder of Unburnt, on a mission to eliminate workplace burnout with measurable solutions that helps employees stay well while improving team resilience. After nearly 20 years in corporate roles, culminating as chief of staff at a 1 billion global company, healthcare became her catalyst to change course. Now she's a certified health and wellness coach. She's combining a executive experience to help ambitious professionals shift from overwhelm to sustainability without sacrificing their goals. She's also a mom, don't worry, and she has 2 kids. And she truly understands the juggles that you guys are facing as well. So yeah, welcome to my ambition.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, it's really great to have you here, Alison.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm excited for this conversation. Ready to dig
Woohoo.
in.
Woohoo! So yeah, I think I thought a lot about obviously the intro we had, and I think a great place to start is that when we spoke, we were talking about there was a moment or several moments for you where your body sort of forced you to listen or to stop, to pause, to change path. Can you take us back to that moment where everything really shifted for you and got you started on this journey?
Yes, absolutely. And again, thank you so much. I'm so thrilled. The power of LinkedIn. We were able to get connected. It's been such a joy following your content. And again, thrilled to be here. So yeah, I think not dissimilar to so many moms, so many ambitious women who were told, really ingrained in their upbringing, you can have it all, you can do it all, you can be anything. I really, really hustled my entire life, right? And I was brought up to have a work ethic, to, work hard, not expect anything, necessarily to come other than kind of picking yourself up and doing the work, showing up, being consistent. And so I checked all the boxes like so many ambitious women. I went to college. I worked really hard in my 20s. I, was really grinding. And I think in talking to so many women now in my current role, was also looking for that external validation, the promotions, the accolades, the, job well done at the workplace versus looking inside and really being happy about what I was building and the career that I was driving, the value I was providing, not because somebody else was promoting me and saying, great job, Allison. And so as a result of, working really hard, juggling 2 kids, going through the pandemic, homeschooling both of my kids. So my daughter was in 1st grade. My son was 3 years old in daycare. His daycare shut down, 6 months closed, just home with us. And my daughter at 6 years old, all of a sudden went to homeschooled, didn't know how to type yet, didn't know how to use a laptop, right? So I'm trying to work, my partner and I balancing 2 full-time jobs, really nervous, like what's going to happen, are our companies going to still be in business? And I'm sitting next to my daughter, making sure she can log into her Zoom. So, just the sheer exhaustion, the trauma of going through the pandemic as a working mom, I think it can't really be understated, but we just kept powering through. And the resilience of humans is amazing, right? That we wanted to sort of get past that moment. But I didn't really recognize the warning signs in myself as it was happening until it was too late. And I experienced severe burnout. I was really, really unwell. I shared with you both that I was experiencing stomach aches and really just kept pushing off going to the doctor, taking some time off, thinking that it'll be okay. I'll take a couple days off after the next big milestone or meeting, until I ended up in the emergency room. And so that, Tiffany, to your point, was the catalyst. That was the moment of, I just can't keep going this way. This is totally unsustainable. I was told I had to have surgery. And for me, it was really, of course, overwhelming, very scary, and disappointing. I was really disappointed in myself that I had ignored those warning signs for so long. So that's a bit about getting to that moment.
Thank you for sharing that. I think what's really interesting in you saying that, one thing that really jumped out to me was that attitude of next week will be quieter, next, let's just get through this busy period, get to the next bit where I'll be able to rest. And I think that's such a common thought and something that we're all kind of pushing through. But in reality, that's not coming. We're never getting to that magical imagined place, I want to say, where things are just suddenly calmer and we actually have that downtime. It's almost like you have to take that step back to be able to create it. So what happened after that? Well, like, how did you deal with that? How did you kind of get the space that you needed?
Yeah. So I had surgery. So I went through that process. I was working from home for a couple of weeks leading up to the surgery. I took some time off. I did go back and I realized that I needed to take that step back. I needed to create space. I needed to recover. It was, according to the doctors, you could take 2 weeks off and then go back. That was certainly not enough. I needed to take time to process, recover from surgery, but also really recover from burnout, because everyone's experience is very different. But it's unfortunately not a case where you can, rest for 48 hours and wake up and go back to your normal old self. It's just, that's not the case. And so I realized that I really needed to do some deep work to unpack what had happened, but really also reflect on, what do I want? I'm at this stage in my life where my kids are both in school. We have busy, full lives. I love everything I'm doing. I loved my career, loved being a mom. And at the same time, we're juggling so much. It's super busy. Like, I needed to take a moment to really reflect on, what do I want? How do I want to experience my days? How do I want to show up as a mom and be present versus just checking all of the boxes? And, to your point, it's a never-ending to-do list. It will never end. So what do I want that to look like every single day? So I left my corporate role in an effort to just take some space to really figure out what that next chapter is going to look like.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I think, you touched on something, because I think there is a kind of there is a stigma around like a burnout. There's a stigma around burnout. There's a stigma around slowing down. There's a stigma around being well. There's a stigma around not like going the hustle culture, because I think sometimes we think, oh, is this person looking for soft life, or, think, oh, they're going to go off and hug the trees or something. So I do think there is that kind of, we've normalized like, working hard, no days off. You see all these quotes and all these like inspirational like quotes and videos. So I think there is a whole kind of normality around grinding and hustling that I think sometimes when you kind of take yourself out of it, it almost feels as if you're being left behind. So I think it's interesting to kind of, I'd love to hear how you kind of create that mental shift for yourself, that it's not a personal failure to, leave the masses behind and kind of think about my health. It's actually, I don't know, perhaps more sustainable, right? Because that's what you're aiming for, especially when you become a parent and you realize that, yes, careers are great too, but you're also raising your children and you're raising your family. So I'd love to know where you're at, or how you sort of mentally worked it out in your head so that it made sense and it fitted you and it gave you peace and not feel like you were leaving things behind or leaving things on the table of life.
Yeah. No, it's such a great question. And I think it's such a shared experience across so many moms, so many women who are trying to balance career and raising children and hopefully enjoying the experience along the way. Yeah. So for me, I absolutely agree. I did view it as a personal failure, and it felt very lonely because in the tail end of me burning out, but still trying to grip on so hard, I didn't really share with anyone that I was suffering and that I was so overwhelmed and that I was reaching that breaking point, because as women, we want to put the facade up that we've got it all and, it's okay. And so when I did finally get to that breaking point and then make the decision to leave and just say, I need some space, it did feel like a failure. I kind of looked around, and comparison is absolutely a thief of joy. But
100%.
I was looking around and I was like, how come I couldn't keep up? This is what I thought I always wanted. This was the role. I had a seat at the table. I'm an executive at this $1 billion plus global amazing company. And by the way, I really had to grieve that decision, because while I knew it was a priority for my health, for my family, I also was saying goodbye to colleagues and friends and the mission that I was so bought in on. So it's not, I tell people all the time, it's not so black and white binary where you're like, okay, I burnt out, I'm leaving. And that's a really easy decision. It was still very difficult. And I had to grieve all of the things that I was so excited about in terms of that corporate role to make space for recovery and what would come next. And so I think I really did take some time to realize, again, it's not going to be a weekend of rest and I'm going to get back to my normal self. And, I dug into the research and I started to really understand personally for me, what does well look like in this season of life, right? I am still going to be busy. I'm not going to be sitting on the couch with cucumbers on my eyes. I have 2 little kids. It's a very busy schedule.
My kid would be peeling that cucumber off and eating it.
Exactly, right? So I'm not going into this Zen space. And so how do I want to think about that, right? So I took last spring off. I walked my kids to school, right? I really tried to limit obligations and the demands of like, figure it out. What's your next role going to be? And just give space to be and to be curious. And as I was doing the research and rebuilding my own nutrition plan, right, coming off of surgery and thinking about what makes me feel well and good and whole versus not so great, it was a period of self-discovery. And I would, invite any of your listeners who are thinking, does taking a break or taking a step back or even staying in my role, but putting some boundaries in place, does that mean it's a failure? I think the answer is a resounding no. We cannot do our best work unless we're well. And unfortunately for me, it took that breaking point to get there. But it's in the research. And so I'd love to share more, but that was my moment. And it wasn't, again, 48 hours. It took some time, but I really had to get to a place of acceptance that I love my life. I love my children. I love my family. And, deciding that my next chapter of my career is going to look different, that's okay. Like I have to make space so that I can be well and show up as the best version of myself in all capacities.
I like that you kind of broke it down into steps as well, because I think it's a real kind of transitional journey, because I think that's perhaps why we struggle, because we think, oh, that person seems to get it, like, and I don't. But it sounds like you said, you took time to grieve. You kind of, you named it. You thought about what sort of family life you want and what it means in this kind of the longer term perspective. And I love that, because I think I'm all about intentionality, and I'm always trying to think about how can I live more of the sort of life on my deathbed, because I have this idea of being on my deathbed, maybe 70, and reflecting, but I know I'll probably die much more tragically or something, thrown against something. But I have this idea of like, I always have this deathbed mentality where like on my deathbed, when I'm like 60, 70, 80, whatever, like how would I look back and what would I, be more grateful for? And I know number one, I won't care what people thought about me. It's just, and you see the bigger picture, like how your children's, I don't know, grew up, or, the lives you touched, the people you loved and loved you. So it's always interesting, isn't it, when you start to kind of stop in them. But I think that's the hardest thing for mothers, isn't it, to stop in the moment and look at a bigger picture, because we're so busy. So I'd love to know, do you have any advice for other busy mothers?
And can I just add to that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Any
sure,
advice on spotting the signs of burnout before you get to that kind of breaking point?
Yes. Okay, so let me do the signs of burnout first, and then we can talk about some advice to consistently, stay well and stay intentional. So the signs of burnout, I think, definitely look and feel different for everyone, right? Everyone's experience going through it can be different. But the hallmarks, the signs of burnout to really pay attention to are, first and foremost, that feeling of depletion. I think we all understand that one. When we think about burnout, we think about total exhaustion, overwhelm, a great night's sleep, and you wake up and you're still just as exhausted. That could be something else. There could be an underlying other driver contributing to fatigue and total depletion. But if there is no other underlying illness or, anything else going on, that's the first kind of warning sign to look out for. The second one, according to the research, is cynicism. So it's starting to feel really negative. It's starting to go to meetings and think, this is a total waste of my time. Nothing's going to change, or why are we doing it this way? And there could be very valid, good reasons why you are looking at something objectively and saying, there's room, but versus taking that pragmatic solution-based approach and like, all right, how do we tackle this together? How do we do it? It's really starting to show up more as that, cynicism and that negativity. And then the third one, this one absolutely was true for me. And, I feel like it's such a shame for working moms, for women to feel this one. But the last one is really questioning your own abilities. It's self-doubt. It's being so overwhelmed that you're starting to think, am I even good at my job? Or to take that step back and think, what am I even qualified to do? And that's a hallmark of burnout. That's a sign to really pay attention to, because you are good at your job, right? The challenge with burnout is that we're in this cycle of complete overwhelm and chronic stress. Physiologically, we can't do our best work. We are not thinking rationally. We are reactive. We're really, emotional. And unfortunately, I'm losing my AirPod. Sorry about that. Unfortunately, I talk with my hands, so I knocked it out. Unfortunately, it's, when we're in that overdrive, it's when we need rest the most and when our body can't turn off. And so then we're in this motion of, really questioning, maybe you're making some mistakes. Maybe you're, just not getting up as early, right, to start your day. And then you start to question, what am I even doing, right? And so that one is so tricky for working moms because our plates are so full all the time. And so we need to make space for rest. So I'm going to pause before the advice piece to not get there. I just want to pause for reaction, kind of see if any of that resonates.
Well, interestingly for me, I feel like you just described how I felt when I went back from maternity leave. And, I had a tough maternity leave with an ill child, but I went back feeling who also refused to sleep and still refuses to sleep. But I went back feeling a lot of those things. And when you said cynicism, I can remember sitting while people talked in a Zoom meeting thinking, this is completely pointless. Genuinely thinking, honestly, this is stupid. Why are we all wasting time talking about this?
What are we doing? Yes.
Yeah, so all of that hit me quite hard there. You were saying, Alison, it's like, oh, maybe I was also burnt out.
Yeah. And it's such, it's the intersection of working moms trying to juggle, particularly coming back from leave. Our bodies are still recovering. We're tuning to being mothers. We're getting used to the new dynamic of the family, sleep deprived. Absolutely. So all of these factors play into then trying to context switch and go into a professional setting. And you're right. Sometimes there are challenges and it can feel like Groundhog's Day, like we're doing the same thing and we're not actually improving or changing. And it can start to feel, quite negative.
I was just going to add that particularly, I came back and people were still having conversations about the same things that had been happening 18 months ago before I went off. And I was like, how are you still talking about this, guys?
Life has moved on.
Come on. Haven't we had a pandemic? I've had a child. I'm a whole different person. How are we still talking about this?
Yes.
So,
how
yes.
have we not done this? Absolutely. I hear that. Yeah. And so I think from an advice perspective, there's a whole spectrum of things. I think, the first thing that I advise anybody, individuals, companies, we have to notice, we have to take stock and really be aware. And so the ignoring, pushing down, rationalizing away, I don't need a day off, I don't need to take a break. We have to first start to feel and understand the signs in our own body. Am I waking up after a pretty, restful weekend and still feeling totally depleted? Am I irritable and cranky in every single meeting, right? And again, there could be very good reasons why the environment maybe is not the right fit for us. But we have to notice and first really understand the space that we're in to be able to make change, right? And the change is going to look and feel different for everybody. But some simple things to first start weaving in. We don't have to necessarily quit our jobs or, leave a role completely. The first thing is, we've recognized I'm feeling pretty exhausted. The second is normalizing for yourself that rest is not a luxury. And so I used to be again, take the break when I retire kind of girl. And I also used to think I can multitask like the best of them.
Yeah.
I am so efficient. I'm so productive, right? All of these things where I'm like, I don't need to take the break. That's fine for other people, but I don't need it. I also used to feel really guilty, sitting down or taking a break on the weekend. I had two little kids, as I mentioned. Currently, they're 12 and 9. You want to feel like you're keeping up with them too, right? And so there was never, I would go through 48 hours and probably not sit down for more than a few minutes. And so we have to recognize that that's not sustainable.
Yeah.
I advise clients that micro breaks throughout the week are essential. They're non-negotiable. We have to be able to build them into our calendars. We have to be able to break from screens. Our baseline as humans in the modern world we live in, with technology, with phones, with constant alerts, constant inbound from so many different channels, we're just not wired to be able to keep up with that. And as a result, the nature of a smartphone has elevated our baseline of threat perception to basically being always on. Like, we're always expecting a ding to come in. We're expecting that email. If we don't hear the ding, we're like, oh, I got to go check. Where is it? When's that next shoe going to drop? And so we're constantly on high alert. We're always on. And that is in and of itself a state of chronic stress. So we have to break from screens, take a walk without our phones, and find those moments throughout our week where we are saying it is non-negotiable. I have my checklist of 3 things I do every week. I walk three times during the workday. I do some breathing exercises, but it is non-negotiable. It is calendared into my schedule, and I'm going to honor those commitments.
And how long would you take for that? Like, what would you define a micro break as?
Anywhere from, you could do it as little as 5 minutes before a call. And so I have one client that's actually changed all of their meetings. They end at the 55 on the hour so that everybody can take 5 minutes, breathe, take a bio break, just get reset, that context switch from, I'm talking about marketing, now I'm talking about sales, they're resetting before the next topic. And they're giving themselves that space. I would say ideally it's 15 to 30 minutes. So you're stepping away from your computer, you're getting some movement in, you're breaking, perhaps if it's nice enough, you're outside, but really baking that in where you're saying, I'm going to do some deep focus work. And then at the end of that block, I'm going to walk away 15 to 30 minutes and then come back for the next set of tasks. Maybe your afternoon then is all calls, but getting that break in, non-negotiable.
I like it. I think I definitely am in the camp of struggle to rest, full of people. I think so much of it is, so for some of us it's learned behavior, for some of us it's just what we saw modeled in our environment growing up. I mean, I grew up in a Nigerian, rest is for lazy people type of environment where, and I really struggle to take a break.
Where lazy is like a really bad
word.
It's
like a disease, like you're worse than like the lowest of the lowest. And now, to give you an example, my husband comes from a very different background where he's just like, I'm resting on Saturday. It works so hard.
I'll attest to that. Tiffany did send me a picture of him asleep on the sofa in his office.
So, well, I was like,
we could learn from him.
It's shocking. Like, it works so hard, but during the day he was just like he has a sofa in his office and he will lie down for like 30 minutes, and I envy that. I'm like, please teach me. But I definitely think it's much of the rewiring of our brain. And I still struggle, but I'm definitely learning, just because I think for me, again, I don't know if motherhood has been a good point, a pivotal moment of thinking, look, if you crash and you burn and you're angry and angst and frustrated, you're just going to frustrate your kids and push them away. And I've seen it in practice, right? So I do think that's definitely been a turning point for me. And another thing I also started doing recently was actually leaving my phone out of my bed. I used to have phone in bed and I just stopped it. I think 2 weeks ago, I just stopped. And it's been
to do that.
No, it's been transformational. Like I generally thought I needed to have a podcast to sleep. And I just stopped. And it's been, I sleep all night and I'm like, without the aid of anything. I used to play sleep music to sleep. It's insane. Now you think you need props or like things to sleep. And now what I do is I have a shower at night, and I actually sleep better
Yeah.
without my phone in my bed. So it's amazing the simple things that you can do.
I'm feeling so cold out here.
Oh no, but this was me too. It's only been 2 weeks, but I'm shocked. Just like I said, just how much of a difference it's made to my
Well,
sleep.
I was trying to go to
Yeah.
sleep from like 9:30 last
Right.
night, and then I was still texting. I was texting you at 10 o'clock saying, "Oh, I really should go
I
to
did
sleep."
that as well.
I was like, "Oh, it's right there."
I think
So
that
yeah,
is
Alison.
such an important point about setting up
Yeah.
our evenings. I also, another thing to incorporate rest, but also, and again, your listeners, working moms,
Yeah.
I think the transition from your workday into the evening can be really tricky because often we're working right up to the last minute. We've got a meeting blocked, up until the time we need to leave to go do pickup or to, take over with our children. And we're not giving ourselves that space to not only transition, like, all right, woof, workday done, but also set up our evenings in a way where we're really intentional about how we want to show up and we sort of get some of the mental clutter out. So one of the things I also advise, as little as 15 minutes, it can be a 30-minute block. I do this every single day. I take a look at what I accomplished. I take a look at what I did not accomplish, because let's be realistic. We sometimes have very long to-do lists and we don't get every single thing done, right? Things come up or, new priorities surface. And so I take a little bit of time before I go pick up my children to sort of take stock. What got done? What needs to be delegated or reprioritized? Let me take a look at my calendar for the next few days. Am I overbooked? Because sometimes we're just in the cycle of doing, right? We've got all this stuff on our calendar. We're just doing the next thing. And we start to lose sight of the why. So that helps to really crystallize, any small wins throughout the day that you had, but it also helps you set up the next few days in a way where you feel like it's manageable, it's coming. And then the bonus is that by going through that, we're getting that mental ticker tape out of our heads on paper somewhere. And I find that I'm so much more intentional with my children because I've done that exercise of like, all right, I feel really good. I wrapped up my day, sort of a ritual to close out that workday piece and then be more intentional. And I have a little prompt where I'll say to myself some version of, all right, how do I want to show up as a mom tonight? Because in my previous corporate life, I wasn't even really aware of how I was showing up. I was just doing the doing. And so many evenings I reflect and look back, I wasn't super present. And that's one of the biggest regrets I have about that chapter. So, I think just giving yourself the space to transition from workday to evening, your second full-time job, is super helpful because it enables you to really be thoughtful about how you want to show up.
I like it because I think also it plays into what you said about, so some people you're going to go into now, and I'm excited about the phone debate with children. I think the more I think about it, like, we are modeling to our children where, we're going to tell them, oh, put your phone aside. So if we're not doing it, I think it's harder to kind of convince them or, encourage them if we're not doing it. So I think that for me has been powerful just in terms of how am I showing up in front of them. And like I said, even the thing about having my phone in bed, I just stopped. It wasn't. I'm still surprised that I could do it because I genuinely thought I couldn't do such a thing. I need my phone in bed. I need to listen to a podcast. So I think it's interesting how we can sort of just change because of how we're inspired by a family life and being mothers. But yeah, I would definitely want to hear about your ideas on phones and screens and smartphones with children. And that side of things.
I was just going to add before we start that it's crazy to think that we do find it so hard to separate from our phones now, considering the short amount of time they've been in our lives. I remember getting my first smartphone. I remember getting my first phone. I was nearly leaving school by the time I got that, and the way they have taken over every aspect of our lives, and also the amount of people I see driving while on their phones is terrifying. But I think everyone's got some level of addiction to their phone where they just can't put it down. So yeah, Alison, tell us your thoughts about this.
Yes. So many thoughts for myself, adults, for children, how we're modeling, but also how they're becoming addicted at such young ages. And so this is, my perspective is not coming from a place of judgment at all. I think to your points, it had phones, technology, they've become so entrenched. Like everything we do in so many ways is dependent. Like we need the technology, right? So I think it's interesting how quickly that's happened. I'm just reflecting, Alex, on what you just said. I think so. Okay. So technology, again, that baseline threat of just having the phone next to us is real. Like we're always expecting that next inbound communication to come in. And I think I've become much more aware, walking into the doctor's waiting room or showing up at a field to watch my kids' soccer game. Everyone's on their phones, right? And so we're so zoned in, and we're so much attached to the checklist. Do the next thing, check the email, order the paper towels from Amazon. I have 2 minutes. It's just this constant, never ending to-do list. So that's the pull. For kids, they're watching us. They are absolutely, they think it's fun, it's cool, it's shiny. There's, we can maybe give them an iPad and show them something on YouTube Kids, but then they're seeing the phone and they think, well, this is the portal to everything. So of course they want the phones. I think from my perspective, I read Anxious Generation. I know, Tiffany, you mentioned that you were reading that as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary when we take a look at the research and we see just how much of an impact smartphones, social media is having on kids, from their ability to connect, right? And just be kids, play without technology, the effects of bullying, the effects on sleep, to your point, kids, teenagers, staying up, and the hours. If you read the book and you can take a look at, they're basically on their phones all night, right? And very general overstatement, but it's impacting their cognitive development because they are on their phones. Again, I'm losing an AirPod. Sorry. Excuse me. And
this episode is not sponsored by Apple.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do you have a blooper reel? Sorry. So it's really important to be aware. And I think every family has to make their own decisions and, feel comfortable with the age that they want to be handing over technology. But, social media is designed to pull you in. For adults, we're addicted, never mind children who are on social media comparing. They're not in a space where their brains are developed enough to realize that what you put on the internet is forever. There's no taking it back. And, something that might seem like a little blip in judgment, it could have real ramifications. And there's just so much to be scared about when we're giving kids smartphones that are completely unchecked. So that's my opening kind of feeling on it. I think we, as a society, have become addicted. And, from a handing phones to children standpoint, we just have to be really thoughtful about the rules of engagement.
I like what you said about being thoughtful, because I think that's where it's at. I think I remember we spoke to, what's her name? She wrote a book recently, and she spoke about this idea of, it's about the values. It's not so much like, is my kids watching too much screen? Is what are your family values? If you feel guilt from how much screen your kids are watching, perhaps it's because you're turning your back on something that you think is a family value of eating at the dinner table. So for me, it's much more the kind of broader perspective rather than, just screens and TV. Because I do think my kids have learned a lot from screens. There's certain things, like Coca Melon and number blocks, alpha blocks. So I'm certainly not like, yes or no, or, black or white in that department. It's more so just, how is this affecting their development? How is this affecting them? And I'm reading Anxious Generation. What I was fascinated about is the differences between, girls and boys. How boys are pulled in with gaming and porn. How girls are pulled in with this comparison, this standards of beauty, seeing women that look impossibly beautiful and thinking, I don't look like that. I want to kill myself. And then social media starts sending them posts about killing themselves. It's insane. But obviously they don't have the, like you said, the wherewithal or the kind of the consciousness to know this is not real. These are people that are filtered. And by them obviously waiting till maybe 16 or slightly at that age, and they can know that, okay, it's not real. So for me, it's more just how can we delay things? How can we let them know that there's nature out there to see? So, and I've decided that I'm not even trying to judge anyone. I really don't care what we're doing about screens, because I think you've got to do what's best for you. We're busy, we're trying to raise family. So I'm definitely just interested in just hearing what people have to say and why they're delaying it and what they've learned in the research. But it's
And
very fascinating, yeah.
I guess as well as how they delay it, for me, it's
Yeah.
sorry, are they going to delay it? It's how do you do that when everyone else is around you also has those phones?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a conundrum when your kid comes home and says, everybody has phones, everybody is texting plans, and I'm left out of the group chat. So I would say, the first thing is technology isn't going anywhere. And as parents, I think it's really helpful to sit down and think about, all right, how do we want to phase them in? Because going from nothing and trying to delay and then handing a kid an iPhone with Safari, with any app, they can get right on social media. That's a big jump, right? And so whether it's 13, 16, I think for parents to really think about how are we going to phase things in so that they're getting used to some technology with guardrails. There's conversation between the parents, you're checking. And so I have definitely some thoughts about what we're doing personally in my house, but I had mentioned to you guys that I'm involved with the parent committee in my town. And one of the things that we're doing is it's an organization called Wait Till 8, because it is really tricky. Kids are getting phones, smartwatches at such younger ages now that 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, they already have, again, everything, no guardrails. And then there's only a few kids left out of that. So what we're working on in my town is getting everyone aligned around the research, really understanding what the risks are, and then having conversations about delaying till 8th grade, which the research shows that first kind of gate.
And what age is 8th grade?
Yeah.
So 8th grade is between 13 and 14.
Okay.
And so that's the first gate of a smartphone with guardrails. And then the research also shows and recommends to delay social media access, like full blown, you just have TikTok and, Snapchat until 16.
Okay.
And so we're working to basically galvanize around that as a community so that some of the younger children, we're kind of all going in it together. We're building a pact around, we want our kids to be kids. We're setting up play dates. We have many schools where you may play sports with one child, but you're not in the district. And so we're just trying to facilitate more meetups so kids can have, screen-free play. And we're normalizing that so that we can delay it as a community.
I think doing it as a group sounds super sensible, because otherwise, you're right, your kid's the left out one, whereas there may still be people who don't abide by that, but then they're the exception rather than the rule, and your kid doesn't feel like the only one that, we've all been there where we've been like, but everybody's got it, Mum, everybody's got it.
Got like trainers.
I haven't got the right trainers, I need them. And, we could go all 80s parent and be like, if everybody jumped off a bridge with you, but I think I can see how unpopular this idea would be if it's not but with the teenagers themselves and the pester power if it's not implemented as a group. I mean,
We're trying to make strides with the younger grades, and then with sort of the middle school to high school age kids, so call it 12 to 18. I think it is about guardrails, and as parents, we're in charge. We don't have to hand our kids iPhones without any restrictions. And so some things that I've noticed that work well with other parents, we're doing it in our house as well. We set up a contract with my daughter. So she was very left out. She was the last, I really truly want to say, the last holdout to get a phone. And that's hard because for girls...
How did she feel about that?
It was really difficult. It was really difficult because for girls, as you're getting into those preteen and teen years, friendships, community, being included, figuring out who you are, but connecting with other girls is so important. And so while, of course, I didn't want her on social media comparing herself or, all of the things that are super scary about giving a 12-year-old social media, I did not want her to be the only one that wasn't able to make plans. When I was growing up, someone could call the landline, and ask if you wanted to go for a walk. So I also recognized that I didn't want her completely cut out with no ability, to be included, to make plans. I also, by the way, had some children who had my phone number who would text me, "Hi, Ava's mom."
Aww.
I love that. You
show
want
up.
your child to be able to forge their own relationships. And so she was one of the last holdouts, but we set up a contract. Like we sat down and said, these are the rules. I'm going to check your phone every day. I'm going to look at your texts. It's not because I don't trust you, but I kind of want to know what's going on, because the phone and being behind a screen can feel like there's no rules in the Wild West. And I want to know, that the behavior of other kids that you're chatting with is in line with our expectations and rules as a family. So she knows. I check her phone. It wasn't just a free for all. Here you go. Like, have at it, figure it out yourself. There have been times, really, I think, important teachable moments, like as silly as this sounds, spam text messages where it has a link. Teaching her, never click on anything. If it's, if it's a spam message, delete it, right? Or come to me immediately, tell me. Like, these are teachable moments where it's that ramp up, because I want her to be safe with technology, and I want her to know the threats and the potential risks. And so by giving her a phone with tons of guardrails, like, we're able to have those teachable moments, which has been really, I think, really helpful.
I like that, because what we're doing is, I think we're raising children to think for themselves, to make decisions. Because I'd love to make my kids decisions for they're older, but I know it's not going to happen. I'd love to be like, you do this, okay? But I just know that ultimately you want them to be able to make decisions. You want them to be able to get to the point where they can make good decisions without the influence of social media. Because number one is the adverts as well, right? They read what people are watching and they can suggest things, and it really is insane out there. I remember a few months ago, I woke up like having had like a nightmare, and I was like, I went to my husband. It's like, I think the kids are watching way too much TV. We need to cut it down, because they were watching, like, I would say, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours a day quite easily. Even though it is educational, I kind of feel like, especially when they're watching TV, I feel like my kids' attention span is just, they can watch it for hours and hours. And again, it was nothing wrong with that. It was more so about, but what are we missing out here? I know it makes our life easier because we can just get on with other things, but perhaps we need to think about connection, sitting at the dinner table. And by just being more aware of that and thinking, what can we do less of? I've actually noticed a huge change. So now we have this thing where we don't give them phones in cars, or as soon as we leave this house, they don't have a screen. That's been a bit hard at the beginning, because they were like, what? So like when we're in a restaurant, when we're out and about, there's no screens. But I found that they're just so interested in the environment. I mean, now my kids will go to the park, they meet someone, they'll be asking for that person's name. My son will say, can we go over there and ask for their names? And I've noticed that they are just more interested in their environment. I just think that is incredible. Now they sit in the car, they don't have a screen, they're bored, and they're like dealing with that boredom and kind of learning to play games. So it's been really interesting what I've seen come out of that little shift around no screens outside of the house. So I think for me, that's what I'm trying to hopefully develop, curiosity, looking at people, talking to them, connection, and understanding that there's a world out here that want you to discover first before you discover the world online, which itself is valuable, right? I mean, even us, look, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn trying to build a brand. So there are pros to being online, and social media has I think it's a great tool, but it's just putting it in its place, right? And not allowing it to, I think, interrupt with building real connection in the real world, and spending time with your family, the things that will last, and I don't know, that will make a big difference, I think, in life.
I think boredom's a critical word there.
Yeah.
Like, kids have got such a low tolerance for boredom now. Like, my mum always used to say, and I hated it at the time, if you ever dared say I'm bored, she used to say, only boring people are bored. Which it's really harsh when you're like 5. Like, okay, must be really boring. But it is kind of true.
Yeah.
You do have to have that ability to make your own entertainment. And if you're just used to, at any spare moment, looking at your phone or looking at a screen, you don't have that tolerance or that ability to either make your own entertainment or cope with just being bored and like looking out the window of the car. I did 6-hour car journeys as a child where that was pretty much all you had to do. You could listen to my mum and dad's Elton John and like look out the window at some sheep and cows that you were passing, and that was it. Yeah. That was your fun.
But you were, creatively thinking, looking
I was
outward
gonna
versus
say,
being like sucked in. I think it's such an important point. I think the connection to adults, why we can't rest, why, never mind normalizing and understanding that rest shouldn't be a luxury. people often say, okay, but what do I do? I have 30 minutes. I can't shut it off, right? And the pull to just go to the phone because it's easy and it does feel like, all right, it's actually mindless. I can just scroll. That's not a rest. That's not a break. But we kind of don't know what to do with ourselves. The same is true for kids. I totally agree. Sometimes my kids with a house full of toys, right? With stuff outside, bikes in the garage, I'm bored. What? No, like go figure out something to do. And I think it's really important that we're teaching our kids how to make decisions, how to, stand in their own truth. When you give them social media and someone is doing something, bullying or something really vile online, the ability to either say, I'm not going to be a part of it, or tell a trusted adult. These are really important things that we need to teach. And the ability to kind of hone your own confidence, hone your own sense of self is really important. And that has to happen outside of phones.
Wow, that is deep. On that topic of what you said about sense of self, I'd love to hear a bit more about how you're approaching your daughter in her teen years, because I know you said you're reading about a bit about that and learning.
Yeah, so I have a daughter. She's my older child. She's almost a teen, crazy, scary. My son is 9. And with my daughter, I was really well aware that, the research shows that girls, their confidence starts to wane at 8 years old. And I remember 6, 7 thinking, this is crazy. Like, she's so confident. She's so, just puts it out there. And to think, oh my gosh, this might start to fall off a cliff was devastating to me. But realizing that happens pretty consistently, according to the research, across all girls, again, devastating. So, I started just thinking through, and based on the research, thinking about ways to build her confidence, ways to give her that sense of self, build resilience. And so a few of the things that I did very early on, we started reading books about women trailblazers. Really, I have always been very focused on professional development for women. So if I was doing a women's history event at my job, I was also talking about that at home with my daughter. Like, women can do incredible things, and we're catching up in terms of the history and actually going back and naming women who were left out of the history books. Let's talk about it. So we would read books like Her Story and, just kind of reflect on all of the amazing accomplishments of women throughout history. I signed her up for Girls Who Code. So Reshma Sujani, she was the founder and CEO of Girls Who Code, now Moms First. And, from an early age, just really, she loved math. She loved puzzles. So I thought coding, I think she's going to really like it, but that's a job that you can do. It's not just for boys and for men. And so she got involved with Girls Who Code, and she loved it. And she met other girls that were super into coding and math, and they would do little projects and build a robot, on a play date, just like really fun things, but gave them that sense of accomplishment and that sense of self. We also have a journal. We have a mom-daughter journal. And I also have one with my son too, because I want him to be confident and I want him to develop a sense of self, and not feel like we're only about women empowerment in this house. So
what the boys at?
A lot of what I've seen work really well with her, like those moments where she and I have one-on-one time and we work on our mom and daughter journal. I have one for my son too. And it's just a time to reflect, and there's all different prompts. It was actually a gift from my sister for Mother's Day a couple of years ago. She got me a journal for both of my kids. And it's nice for them to be able to reflect on who they are and fun things they want to do. And we can there's some prompts where you write notes to each other, and then so I'll leave it on their pillow. They'll put it back in my room. And so it's just really nice
sweet.
I love that.
to have that ability to have them write, but then talk about it. I'm like, oh, why do you like helping people at recess when they fall off the swing? Things like that, these little moments where you can pick up and really like dig a little deeper as they're developing their sense of self.
Oh, you'll have to send me some book lists.
I will. Again, not sponsored by, but yes.
Actually, yes, sponsored. Yes.
I'll definitely send you some recommendations.
No, I've definitely started reading quite a few books myself, just because I didn't have a mom growing up, so I'm the whole motherhood thing, it's interesting to me. I love reading anyway, so I'm like, I might as well read about this thing I'm on, right? So actually been reading Raising Boys, but I'm looking for an alternative books for girls. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Raising Boys is really good. It's just getting me to think about like my son in terms of, just the ages that boys go on, like, sort of 0 to 6, they're dedicated to their mother, or mum is everything. Then 6 to, I don't know, 12, it's dad more, because they want to learn how to be a boy and a man. And then from, I think, 14, it's mentors and actually people outside of the family, just people that they can look up to. It. And it's interesting to just know what the research is. So then you kind of understand that there's a stage where they're more likely to look elsewhere for inspiration. So can you find people in your family, in your friendship groups, that can be that person for them? But it's interesting just to kind of put it into context. Think about boys and how they express emotions. Sometimes we say don't cry, why not? It's just putting it into kind of, it's okay to cry if you're really sad, but you can move past it. I don't know, just a whole conversation I think is really interesting. But I'm definitely fascinated in kind of just the differences sometimes in certain things that typically boys will go through or girls will go through. But I definitely want to read more about girls, because I'm raising a very confident girl, and it does also break my heart to think there might be a stage when she goes like into herself a bit, or feels quite sad or shy.
Yeah. And I think you raised a really important point. It is naming the emotions and helping our kids understand that all emotions are valid. When I was growing up, and I remember across so many friends, it was put a smile on your face, be happy, be grateful. And all of those things are true, to recognize when we are grateful, happy, but to push down the quote unquote negative emotions of don't be angry, don't be sad, wanting to race through. This is why when we're really repressing and not acknowledging that we're sad, it shows up and pops out in all different ways. Teaching our kids, you can't hit, but it's okay to be angry, for example, or why don't you take some space to think about how you want to respond to your sister, but
oh yeah,
that's a big one. but giving them the tools and the language that it's not to say we're racing through this moment. Like it's okay to be upset about what happened. You can't hit her, but let's acknowledge it and not just say go in your room and be happy when you come out.
And not just teaching them to bottle it up, because I guess that's what boys are taught so often, just stuff it down. And, I think we're seeing the consequences of that really in the sort of epidemic of male loneliness and suicide rates and things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Well, that's a great place to, I think, start wrapping it up. Alice, do you have any more questions, or do you think we've kind of covered most things today?
I don't know. Was there anything that we talked about, Alison, when we met before that you feel like we haven't covered?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think the message, just the resounding message for any listener around listening, like really being in tune to what your body is telling you, not what society is telling you to keep up with, is super important. I think recognizing the signs when it's time to take a break, consistently baking in rest, like all of these things are just so important to normalize. So thank you for the opportunity to come on and talk about it.
I think it's been super, super helpful, because a lot of those things that you mentioned about burnout, I definitely felt a lot of those, and I would not have. I mean, I knew I was exhausted, but I think sometimes you can put it down to I've got a small kid, and not see it. So I think actually understanding what those symptoms are hopefully means that somebody listening doesn't go through it, because they're able to do something about it soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And finally,
sounds like Tiffany's kids are going to arrive in the room any second.
I was going to say, before we get crashed in and my ambition chaos.
I see why you're trying to wrap it up. That's fine.
I was going to say,
we have had it crushed by a kid before.
Well, we made it this far. Thank you, Jesus. Where can people find you online?
Yes. So on LinkedIn, you can find me, Alison Campbell. I also, for Unburnt, have an Instagram. It's at get_unburnt. And then finally, if you want to learn more about Unburnt, my company, you can go to getunburnt.com. So thank you again so much for the opportunity to come on and share some of my story.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you,
been really
Alison.
interesting. Okay, we're going to wrap it up there, guys. But as always, please like the podcast, share the podcast, smash that like button, leave us a 5-star review. That's almost become my catchphrase. Thanks, Ted, for that. And yeah, we'll catch you next time. Thank
See you next time.